Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back. Heavy arrows, heavy FOC, and what they're not telling you about. So there's a lot of people that are into this heavy FOC. Drag it into the animal, right? Let the front end drag that arrow in. Well, there's some problems here. I mean, you can't just go from a lighter arrow and throw a heavier one in and not have to resight your bow, for example. You're going to have to do a completely recalibration of your sight system on your bow as soon as you put in anything more than 30 grains worth of weight. Okay, 30 grain is kind of like your safety margin. It's not going to affect your POI, but it's definitely going to affect your windage. I found this out myself by doing testing. I also found out that doing the same sort of thing where you just change the spine, that does change the weight by about 30 grain as well. And yep, POI is not affected, but your windage is. But it's not by much. It's only about 2 inches. So you're going to have to adjust for that. But when you start going 40, 50, 60, 127 grains more than what you last ran, 100 grains more, 80 grains, 75 grains, you have to recalibrate your entire sight system because it's no longer reliable because you had a different arrow in there last time, okay? So even if you're using 2 arrows of the same, both being 500 spine, one weighs, I don't know, 380 grain, and the other one weighs 527. That's a huge amount of difference in point of impact, and yep, windage can be affected as well because that heavier arrow flies differently, spins differently, therefore left and right trajectory is compromised as well. So they're not telling you about all this resighting you're going to have to do. Now for traditional bow people that don't use sights, they just gap shoot or, you know, instinctive shooting as we call it, focus on the target. Well, those guys don't have to worry about resighting anything other than they know they're going to have to lift a little higher either way because of the heavier arrow. But where your next problem lies is your poundage of your bow. Now, at least on bows like ILF bows and takedown bows, you can usually just swap out to heavier duty limbs. So if you're only running 40 pounds right now, for example, don't expect a heavy arrow to make the exact same distance if you're shooting from a far distance, in other words. Okay, so one of the things I had run into when trying to calibrate my spot hog on my Matthews bow was I was at 52 pounds, and that was fine. And I could go, you know, 20, 30, 40 yards, 50 yard shot. Was getting a little dicey on how much calibration tape I had left, but I made the shot. When I got to 60 yards, I could not get a 60-yard shot. There was no way, and I was already out of sight tape. So the end result was I had to go back, and I had to add more weight back to my limbs. So I'm back to 58 pounds on it. I thought I was at 60, but I tested it the other day. Turns out I'm at 58. So anyways, once I did the 58 pounds, and I resighted my 20, got that back on. Excuse me, guys, I'm so sorry. It's getting late at night. It's been a long day. Anyway, once I did that, then I was able to finally make a 60-yard shot to get my elevation at least. Windage was a little wacko, and we found out why that went so bad on us, and, you know, it was pretty nasty. But anyways, so it's going to take, and this is just using the same 400 grain, 400 spined arrows. So I didn't change my arrows, but I needed more weight to get 60 yards. So I needed more power out of my bow to make that 60-yard shot happen and get sight tape accessibility for the calibrator, okay? That put me on tape number 3, I believe, and then we went to tape number 4 after we made some other alterations to our sight system. And then finally I had to make one last alteration the other day, and we're on sight number 10, which is a far cry from 4. That's a lot of different movement. Regardless of that, I did not go from a lighter arrow to a heavier arrow on my Matthews bow. All I did was just say I want 400 spine, 400 grain arrows. Besides, the thing hates 500 spined arrows. especially at that poundage rate. So it's kind of like, well, you know, what do you do, right? So what I want to show you is something where you are not really benefiting as much as you think you are. Okay, like they're trying to tell us a heavier arrow is going to have better impact. It's going to drag the arrow into the target with that heavy FOC. And yeah, that may be true, but you're going to have an awful lot of horsepower to back up that heavy arrow. So if you're used to shooting 400 grain, we'll say, or 460 grain, and you go to something like a 530 or a 600 or a 700 grain arrow, because these guys are making you believe that a heavier arrow is better, which, well, it can be if you have the power to back it up. But if you don't, and you likely won't, you got a problem, okay? Now, I left bows and takedown bows for the recurve traditional guys. They don't have to worry about resighting, but they will have to worry about adding different limbs on with more power, and they're going to have to be able to pull that power at full draw to make it worthwhile shooting those heavy friggin' arrows, because otherwise it's kind of like it's not going to go more than maybe 30 yards if they're lucky. And will they kill their animal? Well, they might, but they're not going to get much more than 30 yards out of the damn thing because they don't have enough power, especially if they're only using a 40 or 50 pound bow. You're going to need closer to 60, try 70, 80 pounds in order to competently shoot an arrow properly that is like, say, 600 plus grains. Now, as far as what you gain or lose, now that's another interesting factoid. Now, there's a program on ashbybowhunting.org, and it tells you, it wants information. The IBO speed of your bow, the draw weight, the draw length, and the arrow weight. So I pumped all that in based on my stinger, and when I actually shot this through the chronograph, which is 527 grain. Now, I did get a speed rating on my chronograph of 199, and I can rely on my chronograph because it doesn't lie. This program has too much fudge room in it, which makes it impossible for you to actually say that it's accurate, and I'm going to show you how inaccurate it actually is. It says I should be getting 223 feet per second and 58.18 foot-pounds. However, if you go to a simplified calculator, now I know this is not a gun, it's not muzzle, but the math is actually perfect because all it cares about is the grain weight of your projectile, and at what speed is it running. It is going to tell you how many foot-pounds of energy you're generating. And at 199 feet per second, which is all I got at 58 pounds out of my 70, okay, I got 527 grains, gave me 46.35 foot-pounds of energy. That discrepancy from actual scientific proper proof of a chronograph versus a program that is kind of whacked gives us a total outage loss of 11.83 foot-pounds that program is out by. Not to mention when it comes to trying to get to the same number, okay, so we got 46.35, which is realistic, okay? Now, if I take my draw weight down to 45 pounds, change nothing else, same arrow, everything else, that would give me 198 FPS on here and 45.87 foot-pounds. So we're within a pound, okay? But that means I got to drop the draw weight down. Now, if I drop my draw weight down to 45 pounds and I shoot this same arrow, I will guarantee you are not going to get anywhere near 198 FPS. You'll probably be lucky to get 100 out of it. Okay, and it's probably not going to go more than 30 feet, and it's just going to hit the ground. Who knows? It might go a little further. But the point of the matter is we are not being told the full deal here, okay? Because I've rewatched a lot of those videos. Nobody mentioned, oh, by the way, you're going to have to completely recalibrate your sight system on your bow to use a heavier arrow, okay, regardless of the weight. Oh yeah, if you have a compound bow, you're definitely going to have to crank the limbs up to probably full power to make it worthwhile to get any extra energy, because otherwise you're only gaining about a pound. I'm going to show you something in a minute, okay? So then, of course, well, if you've got a one-piece traditional bow, you're going to have to go buy a brand new bow unless you're already pulling 70 pounds. Well, then you could see a benefit from a heavier FOC arrow. But otherwise, yeah, it's going to be like a fart in a windstorm. You're going to pull the string back and you're going to fire the arrow. And if you get 35 yards out of it, you might penetrate paper, okay? Or maybe you might stick an inch into a target, but you're certainly not going to kill anything unless you're within about 15 or 20 feet, because you're running a heavy arrow and you don't have the power to back it up. You've got a big problem on your hands, okay? And this is the kind of stuff that kind of really irks me when I start rewatching these videos and I'm hearing what I'm not hearing, and it's kind of like, okay. Now, like I said, so let's do some little experimenting here, okay? Let's put the bow back up to 58 and let's check out the calculator just for giggles, okay? Now, if I was running a 400 grain arrow, which is kind of average and it's a great hunting weight, okay, that gives us 56.84 foot-pounds of energy. But if I drop up just to a 527 grain, so an extra 127 grains, that's a lot of extra, right? Now, our poundage goes to 58.18, okay? So let's do some actual math, okay? So 58.18 minus, okay, 56.84, you only gained 1.34 foot-pounds of energy. That's it. So you went from 400 grain to 527, no other changes. Your bow is at 58 pounds, your IBO speed's 314, your draw length is 28. Now if your draw length is less than 28, these numbers are going to be completely different all over again, and it's going to be even worse for you. Okay, but you only gained 1.3 foot-pounds. That 1.3 foot-pounds ain't going to do you squat. Okay. Now, you should also know and realize, too, that the heavier the weight of the arrow, the higher you have to aim, okay? Even on a recalibration, you're going to be actually aiming higher. So your arrow is going more like this. Now, all projectiles fly on an arc of some sort, okay? So the flatter the arc, the better. But you're going to be like going like this, and it's trying to launch into the atmosphere kind of deal before it comes back down again. Well, guess what? All that energy that you gained, which was a whole 1.34 foot-pounds, you ain't got it no more, baby. And in fact, you're going to have even less because you don't even have enough power to actually back this thing up properly for long-range shooting. Now, 20 yards, 25, 30 yards even, maybe even 35. But I would say if you're going to kill a deer at least, you probably might want to be closer into about 20 yards. Because otherwise you're going to probably end up experiencing some really bad problems if you're not changing the weight of your bow, okay? And even if you don't change the draw weight of your bow, which you should if you want more energy, you're still going to be resetting with a heavier arrow. It's not an option. Trust me, I've been working on this for a while, okay? So that's not a big, huge jump. Now, what happens if we went and we kept the arrow at 527? Okay, now that's 58.18. Let's crank up. Let's see what happens if we go to 27-inch draw, because some of you probably are. What happens to our energy now? Ooh, 54.59. We lost about 3 foot-pounds of energy over 1 inch less draw, which proves also that the lesser your draw length, the less power you're going to have, okay? And you're probably going to alter your draw weight as well, whether you like it or not, because a lot of bows out there, especially dual cams that stack, they stack by draw length. So when you take away draw length, you actually drop poundage. And when you add draw length, you increase. Like my Bear Apprentice, it maxes at 27 inches, and with the bolts all the way down solid, I'm at 50 pounds of draw weight, but if I go to 26 inches, I just lost an inch. I just lost weight without even touching my limbs. Get the idea? So these are the things you weren't told. Now, personally, I'm shooting these right now at 52 pounds on my Stinger, and I'm having a real hard time with getting them to properly dial in, which means I'm going to have to go back to 58 pounds because these things need a little bit more horsepower than 52 pounds to get them to dial in properly, which is another issue too with heavier arrows, is you're still going to have to increase your bow draw weight to get heavier arrows to function properly. And this is still only a 500 spine, but it does have a full body wrap, which is what's giving it all of its weight above a pure carbon at 500 spine. So we kind of got some work ahead of us. Now, at least I can draw 58 without an issue, but I would rather not. But it's the only way I'm going to be able to sight these in and get them running properly is if I go back to 58 pounds, which they worked great with the Stinger before at 58. I just wanted to try and go to 52 so I could have more draw pull, spend more time with that bow before hunting season to work up to easier and easier of the 58. Now that my Matthews is dialed in dead perfect, I figure, why shoot it? Why kill many more arrows or lose any? I'll just shoot the Stinger, but I'll shoot the Stinger with some heavier arrows, and it's going to build my arm up more. So I'm going to try maybe a half bolt turn, which is an extra. It'll bring me to 54. I'll try that, see how 54 pounds works. And if that doesn't work out for me, well, I guess I'll take her up a little bit more and see what happens. But I got to figure out how to get them to sight in with a reasonable weight that I'm happy with, right? And that's the thing. So this is the stuff you weren't really explained to or told about with heavyweight arrows or heavy FOC. There's a lot more to it than just adding weight to an arrow. You have a lot of adjustments to do in your bow, and if you have a bow that cannot be adjusted, like a traditional bow that's one-piecer, if you're shooting traditional, well, so sorry for your loss, but you're buying a new bow if you want to run heavy FOC and run it where it's an advantage to you, because otherwise there is no advantage to torturing yourself or your bow over a freaking 1.3 pounds. I would rather see that 11-pound increase, but that means drawing probably 70, 80 pounds, you know, to get that kind of a substantial increase. Then it's worthwhile running heavy FOC or heavy arrows, period, is if you can get them to run properly. And that, like I said, it's going to take a lot of power to get them to run right. So anyway, that's it. That's all. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and see you in the next one.